noise, which are actually the same topic. So let's start in Max. There's an object called random that generates a random number. It's not really a random number. A computer scientist would call this a pseudo-random number. And if you look at the help patch, it doesn't get into that pedantic point. But trust me, it's using an algorithm that produces a sequence of numbers that appears to be random, but is actually deterministic. And the way it works is you say what range you want, and it works with integers. So it goes between 0 and 1 less than the amount you gave it. So if I want a number between 0 and 10, I say random 11. And every time it receives a bang, it's going to output another number. That one's a 9, that one's a 0. Right? So I can do this all day, and I'll never get a number bigger than 10 or a number less than 0. It's picking a random integer. Turns out, with a computer, there's actually no good way to directly generate a random floating point number. So if you need a random floating point number, the classic way to do it is to generate a random integer in a very large range, like between 0 and a billion, which means I need to enter in a billion plus 1 as my argument. And then that's going to give a very large number that doesn't even fit in the default width of the number box. And then we'll multiply it. We'll divide it by a billion. And we got to do a floating point division, because otherwise, let me show you, this is a classic error. If you do an integer division, it's just always going to round down to 0. I want a number between 0 and 1. And all such numbers round down to 0. So it's got to be a floating point division. And now I've got a very high resolution number down to the 1 billionth point, which is actually probably more resolution than we need, because it's a floating point number. It's only giving me 6 significant digits here. So this is how you get a random floating point number between 0 and 1. And then if you need that to be between 20 and 30, you can use good old scale. My input's between 0 and 1, and my output's between 20 and 30. And now we're going to get a random floating point number between 20 and 30. So every time I click, it rolls the dice again and gives me another number in this range. So that's how you get random numbers in the event domain. If you have a signal that's just a sequence of random numbers, that's what you call noise. That is what white noise is. Every sample is just another random value. So if you look at it on the oscilloscope, it looks noisy. And if you listen to it, it's got that distinctive sound of white noise. Kind of sounds like. Okay, white noise has an equal mixture of all frequencies, which you can see on the spectroscope. So you can see it's not a perfect straight line because it's random, but the trend is that it's approximately a straight line. So it's just as much energy at the highest possible frequency, which is the Nyquist limit of our sampling rate, half the sampling rate. I'm not going to get into sampling theory right now, but that's the highest frequency, that's the lowest frequency, and it's equal energy. That's why white noise tends to be very bright sound. So a lot of times people prefer to use filtered white noise, and the classic filtered white noise is what you call pink noise. So I'm going to select all this, and I'm going to option click and drag, make another copy of it. And I'm going to use the pink tilde object, which is the same. It's still a sequence of random numbers, but it's passed through a filter that makes it roll off at, what is it, 3 dB per octave or 6 dB per octave? Constant power per octave. So it must be, it goes off at 6 dB per octave. Subjectively, pink noise sounds less hissy than white noise. So that's a more robust, possibly good-sounding noise, as opposed to white noise, which is pure randomness, which has a lot more high frequencies. It's just a brighter noise. So that's noise. Noise, again, is just a sequence of random numbers. And we know there's JIT noise, too. And I think I have a separate example already prepared that can show you that. Use JIT noise. To make a noise signal, you need to roll the dice on every audio sample. So you need 44,100 random numbers per second. To make a matrix of noise, you have to roll the dice once per pixel. So I'm telling JIT.noise what shape of matrix to make. So far, we have never synthesized a matrix. We've been doing everything with movies that already existed with a certain number of planes and a certain pixel size. But here we're saying, I want 4 plane noise, ARGB. I want each of those values to be a char. I want it to be 320 by 240 pixels. And boom, every time I bang the JIT.noise, it rolls the dice 320 times 240 times 4 times and fills my matrix with random numbers. And if I do it again, it gives me different random numbers. And each time I do it, it's different random numbers. And if I do it repeatedly, then it looks like what you might call video noise. And that's color video noise. If I ask for just a single plane, then I get black and white video noise. So those of you that grew up watching TV in the 50s, if you didn't have a signal, you would see this black and white noise right here. So that's noise. That's noise in jitter. And because I like my chickens so much, I'm just going to add a little noise to the chickens. So here's my chickens plus 0 noise, and I can just make them a little noisier. So I'm just like adding in more and more and more static to the signal. No noise, too much noise. And how's that working? I got 2 matrices. I got the one that's coming out of this playlist object, which is looping. And every time it outputs a matrix, I'm putting in this button so that matrix for matrix, whenever the JIT playlist outputs the next frame of the video, I roll the dice again. I bang the JIT.noise, it gives me a new bunch of noise, and we're multiplying it using JIT.op by a value that defaults to 0, but that I can change by putting something in the right inlet here. And then I'm taking this matrix of noise and adding it with JIT.op, with my op being plus addition, to get a matrix where pixel by pixel, it's adding that pixel to produce that pixel, and so on. Pixel by pixel, it's adding these 2 matrices together to get my noisy chickens. we just saw how to do linear scaling and linear interpolation, but actually the world is not linear. And in fact, human perception is not linear. And in particular, in terms of sound perception, we often think in terms of a logarithmic scale rather than a linear scale, because that's how our ears work. In a way, I don't want to get too deep into physiology and make claims that can be refuted, but when you hear a certain musical interval, like an octave, that is a factor of 2 of frequency. So if I'm singing a note, la, and that note is maybe 150 hertz, and I'm singing an octave up, la, then if I were singing in tune, then that second note would be 2 times the frequency of the first one. 150 times 2 is 300. So that relative amount is a multiplicative amount. It's a ratio that tells you that interval. If I go up another octave, I'm not going to try to sing that high note for you. That would be 300 times 2 is 600. So the linear difference between 150 and 300 is 150, and the linear difference between 300 and 600 is 300. So it seems like it's a smaller interval to go from the low note to the middle note than to go from the middle note to the higher note. But to our ears, it sounds the same because it's the same ratio, not the same offset. So let me show you an example of that in Max. So I'll open up this patch. Octaves are multiples of 2. And so here we've got our friend cycle tilde going into gain, going into easy DAC. And here's a 300 hertz sine wave. And half of that is 150 hertz. If you listen to this on laptop speakers or crappy headphones, you might not be getting very good frequency response at 150 hertz. And you need a really good sound system to hear an octave below 75. But little speakers can make high sound pretty easily. So from 300 we can go up to 600 and double it again and double it again. So my point about telling you all this is that it's successive doubling of the sound that gives you something that sounds like the same musical interval, namely an octave. So there's an object in Max called M2F that converts from MIDI note numbers to frequencies. So I've got an example right here how to use the M2F object. So again, the MIDI protocol specifies note numbers, and each key, of which there are 12 to an octave, goes to the next note. So middle C is 60, and then as I climb up the chromatic scale here, I'm counting by 1 in the MIDI note number, and each note has a certain frequency. So 57 is an A below middle C, that's 220 hertz, and if I go to an A an octave below that, it'll be half the frequency, 110. 220, the next A is 440. So each consecutive MIDI note is the 12th root of 2 times the next lower note. That's what 12 tone equal temperament is all about. I don't want to get into super tuning nerd mode right now. But the point is that the ratio between each of these is always the same. So let me show you what I'm talking about. The ratio is just what happens when you divide these two numbers. So I want floating point division, and so 1 is a good number to divide by if you're not sure what you're trying to do, or if you don't know in advance what the numbers are. So between this C and that C sharp, I need a TBF, so that I'm always looking at the right value here, so I can change either one. So if this one's a C sharp and that was a C, then they're in a ratio of 0.94, blah, 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 blah. So if this is this high F and this is high E, same 0.94. Okay, so the a half step is the same multiplicative ratio anywhere on the keyboard. That's what 12 tone equal temperament is all about. So how can we use this? Well, let's look at a way to do glissando. So I'm going to show you another object called line tilde. And the way line tilde works is you can either set it directly to a value, like by sending it a number, or you can say, I want you to go from where you are now to another value over a certain number of milliseconds. So this message box has a comma in it, so it's going to output 2 things. Remember we saw that in session 1. Let me just prove that to you with print. So I got some garbage in the Max. I'll clear that. So if I click on this, then first the 220 comes out, and then as a second message comes out the list 440, 5000. So we haven't talked a lot about processing lists, and we're not going to process this. We're just going to send it to line. So what the line object is going to do is when I click on this, it's going to output 220, and then it's going to immediately start ramping to 440 over 5 seconds. And here it is. We can watch it going. 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. So that's it. If we do it again, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi. Yeah. So we're going up an octave over 5 seconds. But what does it sound like? Sounds like at the beginning it's going pretty fast, and then when we get to near the end, it's going pretty slow. It's like whoa. See that again. Okay, that's because this is a linear, it's just going linearly, that's why it's called line, because it makes lines. As opposed to, we can start at 57, which is the MIDI note that corresponds to 220 hertz, and end up at 69, which is the MIDI note that corresponds to 440 hertz, over the same 5 seconds. And you can see it's going up 57 to 69 over these 5 seconds. But then we're going to take each of those numbers and convert it from a MIDI note number scale to a frequency and hertz scale. And what's going to happen is it's going to sound like a more smooth glissando. So now it's just steadily going up. So it sounds more linear. It sounds like we're going in a straight line from the low to the high, because second by second, millisecond by millisecond, every time, for any unit of time, the output is increasing by a certain musical interval. So because we hear on this logarithmic scale, and because MIDI is a logarithmic scale, we can do our ramp in MIDI note number space, and then sample by sample in the signal domain, convert it to linear hertz frequency, and then we get this nice smooth glissando. By the way, this is another example of an object that exists for signals as well as for floating point numbers, because there's an M2F tilde right here that we're using. So this is one example of why you want to use a log scale for making something that's a better match to human perception. This is giving us a smoother sounding glissando, because we're doing the glissando on a log scale rather than on a linear scale. Likewise, amplitude we tend to hear on a logarithmic scale, and tip signals as well as interval. So because we hear on this, it's giving us a smooth frequency, and then we get this nice smooth glissando. Match to human perception. This is giving us a smoother sounding glissando, because we're doing the glissando on a log scale rather than on a linear scale. Likewise, amplitude we tend to hear on a logarithmic scale, and typically when people are talking about loudness or amplitude, they use the decibel scale, or dB. And Max has some objects for dealing with dB, so it's either you're going from a certain decibel value to a linear amplitude, or vice versa. I should say, in addition to there being M2F, there's also F2M. So you should get the same value. So here it's climbing up from 57 to 69. So if you convert it from MIDI to frequency, and then from frequency back to MIDI, you get back to where you started. These are inverse operations, M2F, F to M. Likewise, you can go from decibels to amplitude, or from amplitude to decibels, and you get back right where you started. So here's a floating point number box, and another, and we'll connect them all up. And we'll see that 0 dB is an amplitude of 1, and minus 6 dB is an amplitude of a half, and minus 12 dB is an amplitude of a quarter, and minus 18 dB is an amplitude of an eighth, and so on. So every 6 dBs is a factor of 2 in the output, just like every 12 half steps is a factor of 2. So, and of course you can go positive, you can add 6 dBs to something, and that'll multiply by approximately 2. Not exactly, but pretty close. It's actually every 10 dB. What's the rule? The rule for decibels is based on log 10. So the 6 dB is a factor of 2. It's an approximation. It's pretty close. It's not exact, as you can see. But converting from decibels to amplitude and then back does give you the same number you started with, except perhaps for some small floating point error for using extreme values. So you can use this to make a to control amplitude. So let's do the same thing. Let's do the comparison. Let's take our sine wave, and we're going to multiply it by a line. that is going from full amplitude to 0 over, let's keep it 5 seconds. That's going to make it pretty easy to hear what's happening. And there's a gain tilde. And we'll do another one, same thing, but this time over a decibel scale. Now, here's an interesting point. If you're on a log scale, the formula, how do you get to a 0 amplitude? If -6 is half as much, and -12 is a quarter as much, and -18 is an eighth as much, how far do we have to go until we get down to absolutely 0? To make the amplitude be 0, there actually is no dB. Even if you go down to negative 60, 70, 80, 90, even negative 100 dB is still not 0. Even down, well, floating point eventually gives you 0, but in principle, you need negative infinity dB to get an output of 0. So although with a 32-bit floating point number, negative 127 dB rounds down to 0, in principle, mathematically, you need negative infinity dB to get all the way to 0, which is why if you ever look at a mixing board and you look at one of the volume faders that's labeled 0 dB means make it normal volume, and it might have some positive, it might go up to like +6, +12 dB, and then you might see some negative numbers, but then at the very bottom, you'll see an infinity. That's because of this mathematical fact right here. You need negative infinity dBs to get pure silence. So let's do another head-to-head comparison of linear versus log scale, but this time for fading out a sound. So rather than glissando, we're going to turn the volume down. So I got this example here, linear versus dB fade out. So our two contestants on the left, zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we got our same sine wave in both cases, 400 hertz. And on our left, we're going to start at full amplitude, multiplying by 1. And over the 5 seconds, we're going to go down to 0. So this is a linear fade out. And on the right, we're going to do the same 5 seconds, but now we're going to go through a dB to A. So we're going to start at 0 dB, which means full amplitude, and we're going to go down to -60 dB. Now, okay, granted, -60 is a lot bigger than negative infinity, but -60 dB is pretty quiet. In fact, by the way, when an acoustician is measuring the reverb in a room, then they say the room has a 4-second reverb. That's actually an exponential decay. And in principle, it's infinite. The reverb never gets all the way to 0, but they choose a 60 dB point as the end of the reverb, just so that they have something that's finite. They call that the T60 of a room. All this is just to justify my choice of 60 dBs as being very quiet. But I got a lot of acousticians who are going to back me up on that one. And I want to make sure we got exactly the same volume here, so we're going to set it to 120. So on the left, starting at 1, going down to 0, linearly over 5 seconds. Okay, so if you're watching this, the only thing that was moving in the patch, this meter is on a log scale, so it matches human perception better. And what it showed is what I heard, which is that it kind of seems like it's not doing anything at first. It's loud, it's a tiny bit quieter, and then at the end, all of a sudden, boom, it's all the way gone. As opposed to the nice smooth unbiasing you to tell you exactly what you're supposed to like here. We're going to do the same thing, but on a decibel scale, starting at 0 down to -60, go. Isn't that a nice smooth fade out? Don't you want to use a decibel scale when you're controlling amplitude? Yes, you do. So again, we want to be on a log scale when we're dealing with amplitude or frequency. And you can probably make an argument for doing things on a log scale in video as well. So these are two objects that I use, two pairs of objects that I use all the time. M2F and F2M for the MIDI pitch, MIDI converting between MIDI.
Hello, sorry for bothering you. I want to offer promotion of your channel. Viewers, followers, views, chat, bots, etc. The price is lower than any competitor. The quality is guaranteed to be the best. Flexible and convenient order, management panel, chat panel, everything is in your hands. A huge number of custom settings. Go to Streamrise. Nakrótka eriteli na stream. Twitch. Buy for $0.
The key number and frequency in hertz, and dB to A and A to dB, very, very similar objects, also going between linear and log scale, but in this case, going between the decibel log scale and the A for amplitude linear scale. But what about this issue that you need to go down to negative infinity dBs to get the silence? Minus 60 dB is pretty quiet, but it's actually only 1/1000th as loud as full volume. So let's make a little tweak to our patch. So first of all, if you take a look, you can see that even though we can't really hear the sine wave anymore, the meters are still lighting up over here because it's not a silent signal. What's coming out of this gain if we throw a let's throw a number box on it? You can see these are all small numbers. They're pretty low, but it's not zero. It's not silent. So dB to A, what is it outputting now? We're at minus 60 dB, and that's 0.001. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce a new object. This is the comparison operator for signals. So sample by sample, it's going to say, is it greater than or less than a certain value? And that particular value that we're going to pick is our minus 60 dB point. So we're going to select specifically, are we above minus 60 dB or not? And so here's another single number box, and it's saying 0. No, we're not above 0.01. But if I start this ramp again, you see that until we get to there, we are above 0.1. Max uses 0 to mean no and 1 to mean yes. And so conveniently, we're just going to multiply these things together, and we're going to use that as our amplitude envelope. So get this out of the way. We're going to take the output of our greater than tilde, which as long as we're more than minus 60 dB is going to be 1, so that's not going to change anything. But when we get down to minus 60 dB, this is going to go to 0, and so our output will be 0, and that'll give us pure silence when we get to the end. So let's make it be this special version. Let me make that a little bit more attractive, like yo. So now you see that the meter's at 0 and the output is at 0. We are that is pure silence, 100% nothing. So here we are fading down, and boom, when we get to the end, it goes to pure silence. So in general, when you're dealing with decibels, you're going to need a special case for the negative infinity dBs that it takes to get pure silence, assuming that you want to be able to turn your sounds all the way off. Okay, so control gain, you want 1, a decibel scale, and 2, a special case so that you can get true silence, negative infinity dBs. What about this gain tilde object that's built into Max that we've been using? Let's look at this help patch, and what we're going to see is that, for one thing, it's on a decibel scale. So it's a fader that goes between 0 and 157, and 157 is the maximum is adding 18 decibels, and since the cycle is already outputting between -1 and +1, when we go above 0 dB, in this particular patch, it's going to clip. So 128 dB is as loud as you can go, and if I go a little bit higher, you can hear that clipping. And if I go quieter, then every 10 units of this fader is going to bring us down by about 6 dBs, all the way down to negative 76 dBs when I get down to 1. And then it should just be like a little bit less than minus 76 dBs if it kept using that formula, but no, here's a special case, 0 equals silence. They could have said equals negative infinity dBs, but maybe I don't know how to write an infinity. Here, I'll do equals negative infinity dB, Command J. Okay, so again, a special case for silence when you're using the decibel scale to deal with amplitude. So the next point I want to make is going to combine the ideas of logarithmic scales that match human perception with random numbers and noise. And the task is we're going to pick some random pitches. So we're going to make a melody that's random. So the naive way to do that is to say I want it to be within the octave between 400 and 800 hertz. So we'll make all our random notes within that octave. So we need a range of 401. And we're going to add 400 to each of those. So yeah, I only talked about making random numbers that go in a range from 0 to some maximum. But if you want your minimum number to be higher, then you just add something to it. So this is going to give us a random number drawn from a uniform random distribution, meaning that's the statistician speak for every number within this range is equally likely. So if I click this 50 billion times and you tabulated, let's say I clicked it 400 billion times, 401 billion times, and you tabulated how many times it came out as 493, it would be almost exactly a billion because each number is equally likely. So we'll use that as the frequency of a sine wave. I don't think I've mentioned yet, but the input to cycle sets its frequency. I think we've been using strictly constant frequency sine waves all this time, but we're going to start changing the frequency of this one sine wave here, and it's going to sound random. I'm telling you, it's going to sound random. Why doesn't this work? Oh, that's an easy ADC. I want an easy DAC. Try that again. So that's I think cycle defaults to 0 hertz, which is a 0 hertz sine wave, never changes. Can't see it on the scope here. Let's make its range a little bit bigger. Yeah, it's just giving a 1, constant value, 100% 1. That's a 0 hertz sine wave. But if we click this, boom, there's a 510 hertz sine wave. This is what Gowon calls canonical computer music. I think we should put a metronome on here. And then it'll just change on its own and make it be like 500, 2 per second. I like my drum machine better, but this does have a certain groove. So what's wrong with this? Well, we're on a linear scale. Let me make this a bigger range. Let's take 3 octaves. So our minimum is going to be, I'm going to put a little comment over here. This is a good use for comments when you need to collect your thoughts. Minimum equals 100 hertz. Make it 110 hertz so we can easily convert to MIDI because that's going to be the punchline. And the maximum is going to be 880 hertz. So from 110 to 220 is 1 octave, to 440 is the 2nd octave, to 880 is the 3rd octave. So how are we going to get from minimum 110 to 880? Well, the possible range is 770. So we want a random number between 0 and 770. Whoops. Random 770, 1. And to that, we're going to add 110. So each number is going to be somewhere in the range between 110 and 880. And it looks like all these numbers are in the right range. So let's go again over 3 octave range. But it seems like it's mostly high notes. And that's because it's picking a linear, again, this is a uniform probability distribution. So each linear frequency is equally likely. And of this range of 770 hertz, half of them are in the high octave, more than half. So how do we do this in a more uniform way? Well, we're going to use good old MIDI. So we're going to go M2F, and we're now going to pick a value between, I forget. So let's let M2F tell me. I think if 60 is a C, then 57 is an A, and 57 is a 220A, so I got to subtract 12. 45 is going to be 110. So I'll just add my little documentation here, MIDI 45. And the 880 must be that plus 3 times 12. Can I do this in my head? 3 times 12, 36 plus 45 is 81. Oh yeah, I still got it. MIDI 81, little comment over here, remind me. So I want a random number. Now one thing is we're picking random integers. So if I just pick a random MIDI note number, they're all going to be on the dreaded 12-tone equal temperament scale. So I'm actually going to pick a random number that is, I'm going to take a really big range of random numbers, let's say 1,000,000. And we're going to divide by 1,000,000, as I showed you before. So we're picking a random floating point number. And just to be strictly accurate, let's make that 1,000,001, because random number gets to the end. And now we're going to scale it so that the input range 0 point to 1 point, which is what this random construction gives me, ends up being a random number between 45 and 81. I should have done this on this side, because again, I have only an integer number of hertz, but this still will make my point. So here's all my random numbers. And now, again, all these numbers are equally likely, anywhere between 45 and 81. All these numbers have the same likelihood, but now I'm going to put it through M2F. Whoa, didn't want to open that, didn't want to close that. I just want to duplicate that. And we'll make our own other cycle object so that we can compare. And we'll turn you off, and we'll turn you up, and we'll connect you to the sound. And we'll turn sound on. And this has an equal weighting of low notes and high notes. So here it's in the low octave a third of the time, the middle octave a third of the time, and the high octave a third of the time. That's compared to this one, that's almost all high notes and just a few low notes. So again, to match human perception, we want to use a log scale, and the MIDI note number scale, although MIDI has lots of problems, it is a scale that's linear in human perception and corresponds to a logarithmic scale of hertz. So if we choose a random number along the MIDI scale, and then we convert to frequency, we're going to get more low frequencies than high frequencies because each MIDI note number is equally likely. So we're not going to be, this linear version is biased against low notes. It's going to give us too many high notes, whereas this version that's using a log scale is going to give an equal balance of low, medium, and high notes. is going to deal with a branch of mathematics that deals with true and false values, yes, no. And this is named Boolean logic after the mathematician George Boole. And we saw just a hint of it in the last lesson where we were asking whether our signal was greater than 0.001, and if it was, then we got a 1. And if it wasn't, then we got a 0. So this is showing you that Max uses integers, or at least the numbers 0 and 1. In that case, they were part of a signal, so they're floating point numbers. But in general, if you're dealing with true false values, it inherits the way that it works in the C language, where the number 0 is the only false value and every other value counts as true. So what you can do with Boolean logic, you can combine these true and false values and manipulate them in different ways. So let me show you a couple of simple examples of that. So the toggle object conveniently will give you a 1 or 0, right? If we look at the output of it with a number box, then it's outputting either 0 or 1.